So here's an exercise that uses the modulo operator and if statements and loops, but it brings up a point that we're going to come back to later. So we're actually going to do this exercise twice, once today and then once in about a week, once we've seen a few more of these exotic operators in the C language that can make our code a little bit more compact. So the task itself is loop through values between 1 and 100, and for each value, print whether it falls into the following cases, whether x is a multiple of 7 by itself, a multiple of 3 by itself, a multiple of both 7 and 3, or a multiple of neither. And what the task is really requiring is that we only print one thing per number. So for the number 15, that is a multiple of 3, but not a multiple of 7. So we print out, this is a multiple of 3. And we want to print only one thing for each of those values. So the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is set up a loop. And in a task like this, it's sort of useful to approach it from a top-down point of view. So first, we know we're going to have to count to 100. Let's make a loop that counts to 100. Int x, I guess I'll use a for loop, x equals 1, x is less than or equal to 100, x plus plus. And then inside the loop, I want to test whether x is a multiple of 3, a multiple of 7, a multiple of both, or neither of them. And the way I'm going to do this, there actually are lots of ways of doing this, and we'll see, I don't know, a more compact way a bit later. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to start hacking away at the problem with a shopping list. I'm not going to write anything until after I've worked out my own thought process. So test whether x is a multiple of 3. If so, if x is a multiple of 3, and I'll indent a little bit here, and there's no way that that's going to mean something in a minute. Test whether x is also a multiple of 7. If so, print x is a multiple of both. If not, so if x is a multiple of 3 but it isn't a multiple of 7, then I print x is a multiple of 3. Okay, if otherwise, if x is not a multiple of 3, test whether x is a multiple of 7. And if so, print out x is a multiple of 7. And if not, so x wasn't a multiple of 3 and x wasn't a multiple of 7, then I guess print x is a multiple of neither. So there are lots of different cases to deal with here, and writing them out in comments can be helpful because you can use whatever level of verbosity that you need, whatever helps you understand the problem and break it down. And then I can begin looking at my shopping list and try and figure out how I turn it into code. So the first thing is every time I'm testing whether x meets a condition, and in fact we see the word if here, it's pretty clear I must need an if statement. So I'm going to break this into at least one if statement. If, and then we remember that with that modulo operator, if I want to ask if x is a multiple of 3, what I'm really asking is x modulo 3 equal to 0? So if x modulo 3 is equal to 0, then I do this first bit, where x is a multiple of 3. I'll just indent all of that stuff so that it's clear which stuff I'm working with. And then otherwise, so if x is not a multiple of 3, the answer to this question comes back no, then I'm down in this zone here. Otherwise, if x is not a multiple of 3. Okay, so I've actually already made a little bit of progress. Okay, so now I'm inside here. If x is a multiple of 3. Now I want to test if x is a multiple of 7. I'll do that here. If x mod 7 is equal to 0. So if the answer to that question is yes, then I'm in this situation. Oh, and the automatic brackets are sort of confusing here. And if the answer is no, then I'm in this situation. Then I'm inside the else that goes with that if. All right. And before I fill in that, I'm going to go down and do the same thing here. So test whether x is a multiple of 7. If x mod 7 equals 0. These automatic brackets are somehow rubbing me the wrong way today. And then if not, x is a multiple of neither. So keeping the comments around, keeping my shopping list does make it easier, in my mind at least, to keep myself organized, because this structure, if you look at it, if you delete these comments, there are a lot of curly brackets. The indentation, I think, is also a bit helpful. Okay, so now we go in and fill in the details. Okay, so if so, print x is a multiple of both. X is a multiple, I better print out what x is. So and then there's the value of x. And then I'm going to cannibalize this for the other ones. X is a multiple of 3 and not 7. And then here, X is a multiple of 7 and not 3. And then here, X is a multiple of neither. And I'm going to indent this a bit more to line it up nicely. There we go. And so what I have is this tower of if statements inside of a for loop. One thing I'll call your attention to is that there is some redundancy of a certain kind. I ask here, is X divisible by 7? And then down here, I ask the same question. I have to ask it in two different places because when this happens, X is a multiple of 3. But when this happens, X isn't a multiple of 3. These are mutually exclusive. So I have to handle the same situation in both cases. But there is a way around this. It just requires us to know a little bit more about the way these yes or no questions work. We have a way of combining together yes or no questions. It's something called Boolean Logic, which we'll get to in a little while, maybe a week. But in the meantime, let's take a look at this. Let's try running this. And then I'm going to go clean up my comments a bit. All right, so we'll scroll up to the top and see how things go. 1 is a multiple of neither. 2 is a multiple of neither. That makes sense. 3 is a multiple of 3. Well, that's no surprise. 6 is a multiple of 3. 7 is a multiple of 7, but not 3. Looking good so far. We'll skip down and, okay, 12's looking good. 14's looking good. Let's go find 21. 21 is a multiple of both. It is 7 times 3. And what else is a multiple of both? Let's see. 42 is also a multiple of both. So it looks to me like it's working. And because I'm working with the values 1 through 100, I can verify that pretty easily. There are enough values there for me to test a lot of different cases, to find some neithers, to find some cases where it's 3 and not 7, 7 and not 3, or where it's both. Now I should clean up my comments. In this case, the comments do not help the code in terms of readability, I think. This comment here is just repeating what the print statement does, and it makes the code a bit cluttered. I think maybe this comment can be helpful because maybe somebody reading the code doesn't necessarily know that this expression means test if we're looking at a multiple of 7. And when I talk about someone reading the code, that could include the author. Even I might have difficulty remembering what my own code does. So the comments can really help me when I look at my code later. Okay, so we'll print it down to that. Now, one rule you should learn is that when you've modified your code, even if all you did was modify comments, still test it again. So many people have lost marks over the years because they make a small change to a comment and that somehow breaks something. They make a typo in the code or something and they get a bad mark. Always test your code after modifying it, even if you think your modification was really simple. Okay, so in this case, I recompiled and I ran it. Everything still looks good. Let's take a look at 21 and 42 again, just to be sure. 21 is still a multiple of both, and 42 is still a multiple of both, and everything else, I'm seeing everything else looking pretty good. So I think I've got that correct.